Commander Vextha sat in the corner of the dark cantina, her forearms wrapped around a cup of bitter ale. The space station Kepler 7 was always busy, but tonight felt different. 3 months had passed since the war ended, but the nightmares still came every time she closed her eyes. The war correspondent across from her adjusted his recording device. His name was Jorik, a young Alterian with bright green skin and curious eyes. He had heard rumors about the human-Zephyrian war, stories that seemed too wild to believe. Now he sat face to face with one of the few Zephyrian commanders who had fought humans and lived to tell about it. "Tell me about your first battle with the humans," Jorik said softly. Vextha's claws clicked against her cup. Her purple skin had turned pale, and her 6 eyes stared at nothing. She had fought in 12 wars before facing humans. She had conquered worlds and destroyed entire fleets, but nothing had prepared her for what humans could do when they were desperate. "It was at Proxima Ridge," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My superiors told me it would be easy. Humans were new to space war. They had weak technology and small numbers. We had 500 of our best shock troops. They had 80 Marines." Jorik leaned forward. In every war he had studied, those numbers meant certain victory for the larger force. "The ridge was important," Vextha continued. "It controlled the main pass through the mountains. If we took it, we could reach their main base in 2 days. The humans knew this too." She took a long drink from her cup. Her hands shook slightly. "We attacked at dawn. Our plasma cannons lit up the mountainside. We expected the humans to surrender or run. Instead, they started shooting back with primitive, kinetic weapons, bullets, metal projectiles fired by chemical explosions." Jorik made notes on his device. "Were you worried about such old weapons?" Vextha laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Worried? We thought it was funny. Our armor could stop plasma bolts. What could old bullets do? But humans are clever. They did not aim for our armor." She pointed to her legs with one of her lower arms. "They aimed for joints, for gaps in our protection. They studied our equipment and found every weakness. Within minutes, 20 of my soldiers were down. Not dead, but crippled, unable to fight." The cantina grew quieter around them. Other patrons, mostly aliens who had heard whispers about human warfare, moved closer to listen. "We pushed forward anyway, we had the numbers. But the humans had prepared the battlefield. They had dug tunnels under the ridge. They had hidden explosives everywhere. As we climbed, the ground exploded beneath us." Vextha's voice grew stronger as she remembered the details. But these were not normal explosives. Humans had taken their medical supplies and turned them into weapons. Healing compounds that were supposed to help wounded soldiers became deadly gases. Bandages became fuses. Even their food rations were turned into bombs. Jorik stopped writing. "They used medical supplies as weapons? That violates every law of civilized warfare." "Humans do not fight civilized wars," Vextha replied. "They fight to win, no matter the cost." Their captain, Jake Morrison, stood on top of the ridge and shouted orders while bullets flew around him. Any sane commander would have taken cover. But humans are not sane. She finished her drink and signaled for another. The server, a nervous Helonian with shaking tentacles, quickly brought a fresh cup. "We kept attacking. We had to. High Command was watching, but every step forward cost us more soldiers. The humans used rocks as weapons when they ran out of bullets. They threw them with deadly accuracy. Some of my troops were knocked unconscious by simple stones." "How many humans were left at this point?" Jorik asked. "Maybe 60. But they fought like they were 600. Then something happened that I still do not understand. One of their sergeants, a female named Lisa Hayes, was trapped in a cave with 30 of my soldiers surrounding her." Vextha paused, her eyes distant. Any rational being would have surrendered. She was outnumbered. She had no escape. Instead, she activated charges that brought down the entire cave system. She buried herself alive, along with all 30 of my troops. The cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the background music had stopped. "She killed herself to take out 30 enemies," Jorik whispered. Yes. And as she did it, she was laughing and shouting something about not letting us pass. My soldiers who escaped the cave were terrified. They had never seen someone choose death over capture. Vextha's second cup sat untouched as she continued. That was when I realized we were not fighting normal soldiers. We were fighting fanatics who valued victory more than their own lives. But it got worse. She looked directly at Jorik with all 6 eyes. The remaining humans did something I had never seen in 12 wars. They started using their wounded as weapons. What do you mean? Injured humans would crawl forward with grenades hidden under their bodies. They would call for help in our language, pretending to surrender. When my medics approached to help them, they would detonate explosives. They turned mercy into a trap. Jorik's green skin had turned pale. That is barbaric. That is human, Vextha corrected. By midday, we had lost over 200 soldiers. The humans were down to maybe 40. But those 40 had turned the entire ridge into a death trap. Every rock could hide a bomb. Every injured human could be a weapon. Every shadow could hide an enemy. She finally took a sip from her second drink. Then Captain Morrison did something that broke my remaining troops. He walked into the open, right in front of our biggest gun, and started talking to us over a speaker. What did he say? He told us exactly how many of us he was going to kill before we reached the top. He described the traps waiting for us. He even offered to let us retreat with honor if we left immediately. Vextha shook her head. But then he said something that chilled my blood. He said his men had enough explosives to bring down the entire mountain. If we killed all the humans, the ridge would be destroyed anyway and we would gain nothing. Was he bluffing? I do not know. But my soldiers believed him. They had seen what humans would do. They had watched Lisa Hayes bury herself alive, then surrender. They knew Morrison was serious. Vextha stood up slowly, her forearms moving independently as she gathered her belongings. We retreated that day. 500 elite Zephyrian shock troops defeated by 80 human marines. High Command was furious. They said we were cowards. She looked down at Jorik, who was still scribbling notes frantically. But they were not. There they did not see humans use their own bodies as weapons. They did not watch soldiers laugh as they died for a piece of worthless rock. They did not understand that humans do not fight wars to win territory or resources. Then why do they fight? Vextha walked toward the cantina exit, her heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. At the door, she turned back one last time. Humans fight wars to survive. And when survival is at stake, they will do anything. Anything at all. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving Jorik alone with his notes and a cantina full of very quiet, very thoughtful aliens. Outside, the stars shone peacefully, but everyone in that room now understood why 3 major galactic powers had signed peace treaties with humanity. Some victories, they realized, were simply too expensive to achieve. 3 days passed before Jorik could arrange another meeting with Commander Vextha. The alien officer had refused to answer his calls and ignored his messages. When she finally agreed to meet, she chose a different cantina on the other side, of Kepler 7. This one was darker and emptier than the first. Vextha looked worse than before. Her purple skin had faded to a sickly gray, and her 6 eyes were bloodshot. She had not been sleeping well. The nightmares were getting stronger, not weaker. You came back, she said as Jorik sat down across from her. Your story needs to be told, the young reporter replied. The galaxy needs to understand what happened during the war. Vextha ordered 2 drinks this time. She drank the first one quickly and kept the second close to her chest. What do you want to know today? Tell me about the second battle, the one at the asteroid mining station. The commander's claws scraped against the metal table. Delta 7. That was where I learned. Humans do not think like other species. We had cut off their supply lines. Standard military strategy. Cut the enemy's resources and they will surrender or retreat. She took a long drink from her second cup. The mining station produced rare metals that humans needed for their ships. Without it, their fleet would be crippled within weeks. Any logical commander would abandon the station and regroup elsewhere. Jorik activated his recording device. But the humans did not retreat. No. They did something that still makes no sense to me. Vextha's voice grew quiet. Their lieutenant, Commander Ben Carter, was in charge of the destroyer ship Defiant. Small vessel, maybe 200 crew members. When our fleet surrounded the station, Carter did the impossible. She paused, staring into her drink as if she could see the battle happening again in the dark liquid. He turned his ship into a weapon. Not the guns on his ship, the ship itself. Jorik leaned forward. I do not understand. Carter ordered his crew to evacuate in escape pods. Then he aimed his ship directly at our flagship, the mighty Talon. A destroyer against a heavy cruiser. It should have been suicide, with no result. Vextha's 4 hands moved as she described the scene. But Carter knew something we did not. Human ships are built differently than ours. They are designed to take damage and keep fighting. Our ships are built for speed and efficiency. What happened when they collided? The Defiant hit us at full speed. The impact crippled 3 of our capital ships and created a debris field that stretched for kilometers. Suddenly, our perfect formation was broken. Our ships were scattered and damaged. She finished her second drink and immediately ordered a third. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what the other humans did while we were recovering. From the collision, Jorik waited patiently as Vextha gathered her thoughts. The mining station was controlled by an engineer named Maria Santos. While we were dealing with the ship collision, she was rigging the station's fusion reactors to overload. She was going to destroy the entire facility, rather than let us capture it. But that would kill everyone on the station, Jorik said. Exactly. Over 3,000 human workers and their families lived on that station. Santos was prepared to kill them all, including herself, to deny us the resources. Vextha's third drink arrived, and she took a large gulp before continuing. We intercepted her communications. She was talking to someone called Central Command, requesting permission to detonate the reactors. Did they give permission? That is what terrified me. Central Command told her to wait for 30 minutes. They wanted to give civilian families time to reach the escape pods. But if we tried to board the station, she was authorized to detonate immediately. The cantina seemed to grow colder as Vextha spoke. Other patrons had moved to tables farther away, as if her words carried some kind of curse. My fleet commander, Admiral Zexkar, tried to negotiate. He offered to let the civilians evacuate safely if Santos would surrender the station intact. She laughed at him. She laughed. She said humans do not negotiate with invaders. Then she started counting down from 10. She was going to blow up the reactors just to prove she could do it. Vextha's voice grew shakier. Admiral Zexkar had fought in 20 campaigns. He had conquered 12 worlds, but he had never faced an enemy willing to destroy everything rather than lose. He ordered the fleet to retreat. Jorik stopped taking notes. The entire fleet retreated because of one engineer? One engineer who was crazy enough to commit mass murder to deny us a victory. But it got worse. As we pulled back, the escape pods from Carter's ship regrouped and launched a counterattack. Counterattack with escape pods? Vextha nodded grimly. Humans had modified their escape pods with weapons and shields. What should have been helpless refugees became a swarm of fighters. They used the debris field from their own destroyed ship as cover. She traced patterns on the table with her claws. The pod pilots were the same crew members who had just watched their ship die. They should have been demoralized and broken. Instead, they fought like demons. They coordinated their attacks perfectly, targeting our damaged vessels. How? Many escape pods were there? Maybe 40. Against a fleet of 15 capital ships and dozens of smaller vessels. By all logic, we should have destroyed them in minutes. Vextha's laugh was bitter and cold. But humans do not follow logic. They follow something else. Something that makes them fight harder when they lose their ship instead of giving up. She pointed to a scar on her upper arm that Jorik had not noticed before. One of those escape pods rammed my command ship. The pilot, a young human female, crashed directly into our bridge. She died instantly, but her sacrifice allowed 3 other pods to breach our hull. What did the boarding parties do? They were not trying to capture the ship, they were trying to destroy it from the inside. Each human carried enough explosives to cripple a vessel 10 times larger than an escape pod. Vextha stood up and walked to the cantina's window. Outside, ships moved peacefully through space, their lights twinkling like stars. In 30 minutes, We lost more ships than in any battle of the previous year. Not to superior technology or better tactics. We lost to humans who were willing to die for nothing more than spite. She returned to the table and sat down heavily. But the most frightening thing happened as we finally retreated. Maria Santos sent us a message on all frequencies. What did she say? She said the fusion reactors were still rigged to explode. Even though we were leaving, she could detonate them at any time. She wanted us to know that humans could reach out and hurt us even after we thought we were safe. Vextha's 6 eyes closed and she was quiet for a long moment. For 3 days we monitored the station. We expected Santos to disarm the reactors once we were gone. Instead, she kept them armed, ready to explode. Why? Because she wanted to send a message to our fleet, to our command, to our entire empire. She wanted us to know that humans would rather destroy everything than let enemies take it. Jorik saved his recording and prepared to leave. Did she ever disarm the reactors? Vextha opened her eyes and looked directly at him. I do not know. For all I know, Maria Santos is still sitting in that station, her finger on the button that could kill thousands of her own people, waiting for the next enemy to come too close. She gestured to the peaceful ships outside the window. Every night I wonder how many other humans are out there, ready to destroy everything they love rather than see it captured. How many more Ben Carters are willing to turn their ships into weapons? How many more Maria Santos are sitting next to bombs, waiting for a reason to use them? The reporter gathered his equipment and stood to leave. Commander, do you think humans are evil? Vextha considered the question carefully. No. Evil implies malice without purpose. Humans have a purpose. They want to survive. But they have decided that survival includes making sure their enemies pay such a high price for victory that the victory becomes meaningless. As Jorik walked away, Vextha called after him. Be careful what you do with these stories, young reporter. Some truths are too dangerous to spread. Some knowledge makes the universe a scarier place. But Jorik was already gone, hurrying through the corridors of Kepler 7 with his recording device clutched tightly in his hands. Behind him, Vextha ordered another drink and stared out at the stars, wondering if somewhere out there, Maria Santos was still waiting with her finger on the trigger. A week passed before Vextha agreed to meet with Jorik again. This time she chose a small restaurant in the outer ring of Kepler 7. The place was almost empty, with only a few tired travelers eating quietly in the corners. Vextha looked terrible. Her purple skin had turned almost white, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting enemies to appear from the shadows. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You are making a mistake by recording these stories, she said as Jorik sat down. People need to know what happened, the reporter replied. The galaxy needs to understand why the war ended the way it did. Vextha ordered only water this time. Her 4 hands shook as she lifted the glass to her lips. What I am about to tell, you will give you nightmares. It gave me nightmares, and I lived through it. She stared at the table for a long moment before continuing. The third battle was not really a battle, it was a hunt, and we were the prey. Jorik activated his recording device and waited patiently. It happened on Verdania, a forest world with thick jungle covering most of the surface. High Command sent me with 200 soldiers on a reconnaissance mission. We were supposed to scout enemy positions and report back. Vextha's 6 eyes grew distant. Intelligence told us there might be 20 or 30 human soldiers in the area. Special forces, but still just humans with basic equipment. We had advanced scanners, heavy weapons, and full body armor. It should have been a simple mission. What went wrong? Everything. From the moment we landed, we were being watched. Not by satellites or sensors, by human eyes. They were studying us, learning our patterns, understanding how we moved and thought. She took another sip of water. The first sign of trouble came on the 2nd day. We found one of our forward scouts dead, hanging from a tree, but he was not just killed. He was displayed as a warning. Jorik leaned forward. What do you mean, displayed? His armor had been removed carefully. His weapons were arranged in a circle around the tree, and there was a message carved into the bark in our own language. What did it say? Welcome to our jungle. You do not belong here. Leave now or join your friend. Vextha's voice grew even quieter. But the message was not the worst part. The worst part was the sound recording they left playing on a loop. It was our scouts' death screams, broadcast from hidden speakers throughout the forest. The reporter stopped writing and looked up. They used psychological warfare. They turned the jungle into a house of horrors. Everywhere we went, we heard the voices of dead Zephyrians screaming in pain. The humans had recorded every death and played them, back to terrify us. Vextha stood up and walked to the restaurant's window. Outside, the space station's corridors were well lit and safe. Inside the restaurant, she felt trapped and exposed. The human unit was led by Staff Sergeant Chris Morgan. We learned his name because he introduced himself over our communication channels. He spoke perfect Zephyrian and knew details about our military structure that should have been classified. How did he get that information? We never found out. But Morgan knew the names of our officers, our home planets, even our families. He would broadcast personal messages during the night, talking about our loved ones as if he knew them personally. Vextha returned to the table and sat down heavily. Morgan had specialists working with him. Corporal Amy Rodriguez was an expert in alien psychology. She understood how our minds worked better than we did. Private Danny Kim was a master of camouflage and stealth. Together they made the jungle our enemy. How many humans were actually there? We never knew for certain. Maybe 15, maybe 20. But they made us feel like we were surrounded by hundreds. She traced patterns on the table with her claws. They used scent markers that confused our tracking abilities. Zephyrians navigate partly by smell, but the humans created false trails that led us in circles or into traps. What kind of traps? Simple ones that hurt our pride as much as our bodies. Ropes that tangled our legs. Pits covered with leaves that dropped us into mud. Branches that snapped back and struck us in the face. Vextha's laugh was bitter. We were elite soldiers being defeated by children's pranks, but the humans made each trap personal. They studied our individual weaknesses and targeted them specifically. She pointed to her left arm, which moved stiffly. I have a war injury from 3 campaigns ago. The humans somehow learned about it and designed traps that targeted that specific weakness. Every trap was customized for its victim. Jorik made notes quickly. How did they learn such personal details? They captured some of our soldiers alive, not for interrogation. They were too smart for that. Instead, they used our own people as bait. The restaurant grew quiet around them. Even the background music seemed to fade away. The humans would injure a Zephyrian soldier and leave him in an obvious location. When we came to rescue him, our comrade would warn us about traps. But the warnings were lies, planted by the humans. They had turned our own people into unwilling weapons against us. Vextha's voice broke slightly. Our soldiers were not traitors. They thought they were helping, but the humans had fed them false information, making them believe they knew where the traps were. When we followed their advice, we walked into different traps entirely. That is incredibly cruel. That is human warfare. They understand that the strongest bonds in any military unit are loyalty and trust, so they weaponize those bonds against us. She took a long drink of water before continuing. By the 4th day, we had lost 30 soldiers, not to superior firepower or technology. We lost them to fear, confusion, and paranoia. We started suspecting each other. We questioned every order and doubted every piece of information. What? About your leadership? Could you not maintain discipline? I tried, but Staff Sergeant Morgan was always one step ahead. He had studied Zephyrian military doctrine and knew exactly how we would respond to each situation. Vextha's claws scraped against the table. When I ordered the unit to move in smaller groups, the humans picked us off one by one. When I ordered us to stay together, they used area weapons that affected large groups. When I tried to establish a defensive perimeter, they attacked from directions we had not considered. How did they know your plans? They were listening to our communications, but more than that, they were predicting our tactics based on their study of our psychology. Morgan knew how Zephyrian commanders think, because he had made it his job to understand us. She stood up again and paced around the small restaurant. The breaking point came on the 6th day. We found Corporal Hickstar, one of my best soldiers, sitting under a tree. He was alive, but staring at nothing. What was wrong? With him? The humans had captured him 2 days earlier. When we found him, he was uninjured but completely broken. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over. What phrase? They know everything, they know everything, they know everything. Vextha sat back down and buried her face in her hands. Hickstar never recovered. Even now, months later, he is still in a medical facility repeating those same words. What had the humans done to him? Nothing physical. They had simply talked to him. For 2 days, they had conversations about his life, his fears, his hopes for the future. They knew details about his childhood that he had never told anyone. They understood his personality better than he understood himself. The reporter stopped, writing, and looked up. How is that possible? Amy Rodriguez had spent years studying Zephyrian psychology. She could read our body language, predict our emotional responses, and manipulate our thoughts with surgical precision. Vextha's voice grew stronger as she reached the end of her story. On the 7th day, I made the hardest decision of my military career. I ordered a retreat. 200 elite soldiers defeated by fewer than 20 humans who had never fired a shot at us. You never engaged them in direct combat? Never. They were too smart for that. They knew that in a straight fight our superior numbers and equipment would win, so they fought a different kind of war, a war of minds and spirits. She gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. As we reached the extraction point, Staff Sergeant Morgan sent us a final message. He thanked us for the training exercise and wished us luck in our future campaigns. Training exercise? Vextha stopped at the restaurant door and looked back at Yorick. The humans had used us to test their tactics. We were not enemies to be defeated. We were laboratory animals being studied by predators who wanted to understand how we thought and felt. She opened the door and stepped into the corridor. That is when I realized the truth about human warfare. They do not fight to win battles. They fight to understand their enemies so completely that future battles become unnecessary. As the door closed behind her, Yorick sat alone with his notes and a growing sense of unease. Somewhere in the galaxy, he realized, humans were studying other alien species with the same terrifying precision they had used on Vextha's unit. The thought made him very, very nervous. 2 weeks passed before Yorick saw Vextha again. He had tried to contact her many times, but she never answered. When she finally appeared at his hotel room door, she looked like she had not slept in days. Her purple skin was almost gray, and her 6 eyes were red and swollen. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past him into the room. "But not in public. The walls have ears on this station." Yorick closed the door and activated the room's privacy shield. "You look terrible. Are you all right?" Vextha collapsed into a chair by the window. "I have been thinking about what you are doing with these stories, about what will happen when other species learn the truth about human warfare." "The truth needs to be told," Yorick replied, setting up his recording device. "Does it? Will the galaxy be safer when everyone knows how dangerous humans can be? Or will it just create more fear and hatred?" She stared out the window at the stars beyond. "What I'm about to tell you is the worst story of all. It is about Haven Colony and the siege that lasted 3 months. Yorick sat down across from her and waited. Haven Colony was humanity's most important agricultural world. It fed 12 other human settlements and supplied food to their military forces. High Command decided to starve the humans into surrender by cutting off their food supply. Vextha's 4 hands moved restlessly as she spoke. The strategy was simple and proven. Surround the planet, destroy any supply ships, and wait. No species can fight without food. Within weeks, the humans would have to surrender or watch their people starve. But they did not surrender. They did something that defied all logic and military sense. They turned the siege into a weapon against us. She turned away from the window and looked directly at Yorick. The colony was defended by General Patricia Lee, a human female who had spent her entire career studying siege warfare. But she was not just a military commander. She understood something about humans that we did not. What was that? Humans become more dangerous when they are desperate, not less. Most species give up when faced with impossible odds. Humans start looking for creative solutions. Vextha stood up and began pacing around the small room. Within days of the siege beginning, the humans had converted their farming equipment into weapons. Tractors became mobile artillery platforms. Irrigation systems became delivery methods for chemical weapons. Even their livestock became part of their defense strategy. How can farm animals be used as weapons? The humans trained their cattle to detect Zephyrian pheromones. When our scout teams tried to infiltrate the colony, the animals would sound alarm calls that alerted human defenders. They turned their entire ecosystem into an early warning system. She stopped pacing and gripped the back of her chair. But the worst part was what they did with their children. Jorik looked up from his notes. Children? Human offspring, some as young as 10 years old, volunteered for military missions. Their small size allowed them to reach places that adult soldiers could not. Their innocence made our troops hesitate to shoot them. Vextha's voice grew strained. There was a teacher named Miss Caroline Brooks who organized the children into sabotage units. She taught them how to make explosives from classroom chemicals and fertilizers. 12-year-old humans were crawling through ventilation systems to plant bombs in our equipment. That is horrible. Using children as soldiers violates every civilized law. The humans did not see it as using children. They saw it as teaching survival skills. To them, there was no difference between education and military training when their colony was under attack. She returned to the window and pressed her face against the cool glass. The most successful mission was led by a group of 8 children, the oldest only 14 years old. They managed to destroy our main communication relay using nothing but farming tools and school supplies. How did they get close enough? They disguised themselves as refugees fleeing the colony. Our soldiers saw scared children carrying teddy bears and toys. They never suspected that the toys were filled with explosives and the children were trained saboteurs. Vextha's reflection in the window looked haunted. When the relay exploded, we lost contact with half our fleet for 6 hours. During that time, human forces launched coordinated attacks on our isolated ships. They had planned the entire operation around the temporary communication blackout. She turned back to face Jorik. But the children's mission was not a complete success. 3 of them were killed in the explosion. The humans held a funeral service that we intercepted on our scanners. What was significant about the funeral? The remaining children were not crying or traumatized. They were angry. They wanted to volunteer for more dangerous missions to avenge their friends. Miss Brooks had to restrain them from attempting suicide. Attacks on our ships. Vextha sat back down, her forearms wrapped around herself. That was when I understood that we were not fighting an army. We were fighting an entire civilization that had decided to resist with every man, woman, and child they had. What happened as the siege continued? The humans kept adapting and improving their defenses. They weaponized their crop diseases, creating biological agents that could kill Zephyrian troops without harming human plants. They used their knowledge of soil chemistry to create underground tunnel networks that our scanners could not detect. Took a deep breath before continuing. The colony's mayor, Steve Collins, was not a military man. He was a farmer and politician. But he understood logistics better than most generals. He organized the civilian population into a support network that kept the military supplied with everything they needed. How could farmers support a military defense? They knew the land better than any satellite scan could reveal. They understood weather patterns, soil composition, and underground water sources. They used this knowledge to predict where our forces would land and what routes we would take. Vextha's voice grew stronger as she remembered more details. Collins organized the civilians into work shifts that operated around the clock. While some people slept, others were manufacturing weapons, growing food, or maintaining equipment. The entire colony became a single military unit. What was the breaking point for your forces? It came in the 3rd month when our intelligence reported that the humans were running out of food. We prepared for their surrender. Instead, they started eating things that would poison most other species. She shuddered at the memory. Tree bark, grass, even certain types of dirt that contained nutrients. They had modified their own digestive systems using medical technology to extract nutrition from sources that should have been inedible. They modified themselves biologically. Yes. Rather than surrender, they changed their own bodies to survive on less food. Some humans lost significant body weight, but they remained capable fighters. They had literally evolved during the siege to meet the challenge. Vextha stood up and walked to the room's small kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water with shaking hands. The final blow came when we discovered what the humans had prepared as their last resort. What was that? Tom Walker, their demolitions expert, had rigged the entire agricultural center with explosives. Not just the buildings, but the soil itself. If we tried to capture the colony, they would destroy the farmland and make the planet useless for growing food. She drank the water in one gulp. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that they had calculated exactly how much explosive force would be needed to create a permanent crater that would never support agriculture again. They were willing to destroy their own world. They were willing to turn their home into a wasteland, rather than let us use it to feed our troops. General Lee sent us detailed plans showing how the explosions would spread radioactive material through the soil for hundreds of years. Vextha returned to her chair and sat down heavily. The humans were not bluffing. Our geological experts confirmed that their plan would work. If we invaded, we would capture a dead planet that could never produce food again. So you retreated? High Command ordered a withdrawal after 93 days. We had enough firepower to destroy the colony, but we could not capture it without making it worthless. The humans had turned their greatest asset into a weapon they could use only once. She looked directly at Jorik with all 6 eyes. As we left orbit, General Lee sent us a message. She thanked us for giving her people a chance to prove their worth. She said the siege had made them stronger and more united than ever before. Did she mean that? I think she did. The humans had discovered that they could survive anything if they worked together. They had turned starvation into innovation, desperation into determination, and fear into fury. Vextha gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. That siege taught me the most frightening lesson about human warfare. They do not just fight to win. They fight to prove that they cannot be broken, and they will destroy everything they love rather than let enemies break them. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. Tomorrow I will tell you about the last battle, the one that ended the war. But I warn you, reporter, that story will change how you see humans forever. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess. The door closed behind her, leaving Jorik alone with his recording device and a growing understanding of why the Zephyrian Empire had agreed to peace. Some enemies, he realized, were too costly to defeat. Vextha arrived at Jorik's hotel room exactly at midnight. She moved like a ghost through the corridors, checking over her shoulder constantly. When she entered the room, she immediately closed all the window shutters and activated every privacy device she could find. "This is the last time we will meet," she said without greeting. "After tonight, I am leaving Kepler-7 and never returning." Jorik set up his recording device with trembling hands. Over the past weeks, Vextha's stories had given him nightmares too. He was beginning to understand why she looked so haunted. "Tell me about the final battle," he said softly. Vextha sat in the darkest corner of the room, as far from the windows as possible. It was not really a battle. It was a revelation. We learned why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. The battle took place at Earth's moon. Our largest fleet, over 200 ships, surrounded the lunar colonies. We thought it would be our greatest victory. Why the moon? Earth's moon contained the humans' most important research facilities and military bases. Capturing it would cripple their war effort and force them to surrender. At least that was what our strategists believed. Vextha's 6 eyes reflected the dim light as she continued. The lunar colonies were defended by Admiral Helen Stone, a human female who had never lost a battle. Our intelligence said she had 40 ships and maybe 50,000 personnel. Those odds should have favored your fleet. Numbers mean nothing when fighting humans. We should have learned that by then, but our commanders still thought like civilized beings. She shifted in her chair, the movement barely visible in the darkness. Admiral Stone did something that broke our understanding of military strategy. She turned the entire moon into a weapon. Jorik leaned forward. How can you turn a moon into a weapon? The humans had hidden nuclear devices throughout their own colonies. Not just military targets, but civilian areas too. Schools, hospitals, residential districts. Everything was rigged to explode. The reporter stopped writing. They were going to destroy their own people? That was just the beginning. Stone had calculated exactly how many nuclear explosions would be needed to crack the moon's surface and send debris flying toward Earth. She was prepared to destroy humanity's homeworld rather than let us capture their moon. Vextha's voice grew even quieter. But the most terrifying part was how calm she was about it. Stone sent us detailed technical specifications showing how the moon's destruction would affect Earth's tides, climate, and orbital stability. She was bluffing, right? We thought so at first, then our sensors detected the nuclear devices, hundreds of them, all armed and ready to detonate. Stone was not bluffing. She was giving us a scientific explanation of how she planned to commit genocide against her own species. Vextha stood up and walked to the sealed window, pressing her hand against the metal shutter. Our fleet commander, Supreme Admiral Carthex, tried to negotiate. He offered to spare the civilian colonies if Stone would surrender the military bases. What did she say? Stone laughed. Then she explained that humans do not negotiate with invaders. They only negotiate the terms of their enemy's destruction. The room felt colder as Vextha continued her story. Stone gave us 1 hour to retreat beyond the outer planets. If we were still in the solar system after that time, she would detonate every nuclear device simultaneously. Did your admiral take the threat seriously? Carthex had fought humans before. He knew they meant what they said. But High Command ordered him to call their bluff. They refused to believe that any species would commit suicide rather than surrender. Vextha returned to her chair and sat down heavily. 59 minutes later, Stone sent us a final message. She said the nuclear devices were armed and ready. She was holding the detonation switch in her hand. What happened next? Supreme. Admiral Carthex ordered an immediate assault on the moon's surface. He hoped to capture Stone before she could destroy everything. It was our biggest mistake of the entire war. She took a deep breath before continuing. The assault force was led by Colonel Hexmar, our best ground commander. He landed with 5,000 elite troops at the main lunar base. They expected to find Stone in a fortified command center. Where was she? Standing in the middle of the landing zone, completely alone, holding a small device in her hands. She was not wearing armor or carrying weapons. She just stood there waiting for our troops to arrive. Vextha's voice began to shake. Colonel Hexmar approached her with his weapon raised. He demanded that she surrender the detonation device. Stone smiled and asked him a question that still haunts me. What question? She asked him if he had ever seen a moon explode. Then she started counting down from 10. The reporter looked up from his notes. In front of 5,000 soldiers? Stone looked directly at Colonel Hexmar and continued counting. 9, 8, 7. She never broke eye contact with him. She never showed any fear or hesitation. Vextha's 4 hands clenched into fists. At the count of 3, Colonel Hexmar broke. He had faced death in dozens of battles, but he had never faced someone willing to destroy an entire world just to kill him. He ordered an immediate retreat. The entire assault force retreated? 5,000 elite soldiers ran from one unarmed human female. But we were not running from Stone. We were running from what she represented. She stood up again and began, pacing in the small space. As our troops evacuated, Stone reset her countdown. She gave us another hour to leave the solar system. But this time she added something that made our blood freeze. What did she add? Stone said that human colonies throughout the galaxy had received the same orders. If Earth was attacked, every human settlement would detonate their own nuclear devices. The entire human species would commit suicide rather than live under alien rule. Vextha stopped pacing and stared at the floor. We realized that we were not fighting for territory or resources. We were fighting a species that had decided extinction was preferable to defeat. How did the war end? Supreme Admiral Carthex made a decision that saved both our species. He ordered a complete withdrawal from human space and opened communication. channels for peace negotiations. She sat back down and looked directly at Jorik. But the most frightening thing happened during our retreat. We intercepted a transmission from Earth to all human colonies. What did it say? It was from Stone to her people. She apologized for not getting a chance to detonate the nuclear devices. She said she had been looking forward to showing the aliens what humans do to invaders. Vextha's 6 eyes closed as she remembered. Stone was disappointed that she did not get to commit genocide. She wanted to destroy the moon and everyone on it, including herself. That was when we understood the truth about human warfare. What? Truth? Humans do not fight wars to win. They fight wars to send messages. The message is always the same. Attacking humanity will cost more than any victory is worth. She opened her eyes and gathered her belongings. After the war ended, our intelligence services studied human psychology extensively. They discovered something that explained everything we had experienced. What did they discover? Humans evolved on a planet where almost everything could kill them. Their psychology is built around the concept of mutually assured destruction. They would rather die fighting than live in submission. Vextha walked to the door and placed her hand on the control panel. Every other species in the galaxy fights. Wars to gain something. Resources, territory, power, revenge. Humans fight wars to prove that attacking them is a mistake that enemies will never want to repeat. Is that why the other major powers signed peace treaties with humanity? 3 galactic empires saw what happened to us and decided that humans were too dangerous to fight. Not because humans are stronger or smarter, but because they are willing to pay prices that other species cannot imagine. She opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Jorik, I hope you understand what you are doing with these stories. You are teaching the galaxy to fear humanity. Is that a bad thing? Vextha paused in the doorway. Fear can prevent wars, but it can also cause them. Some species might decide that humans are too dangerous to be allowed to exist. What do you think will happen? I think humans have already won the greatest victory possible. They have convinced the galaxy that fighting them is not worth the cost. But they have also painted a target on themselves that will never disappear. She looked back at him one final time. Be careful with these stories, young reporter. Some truths are weapons that can destroy the peace they were meant to protect. The door closed behind her, and Jorik was left alone with his recordings and a terrible understanding. Somewhere in the galaxy, humans were preparing for the next war, while other species were deciding whether humanity was an ally to befriend or a threat to eliminate. The final battle of the human-Zephyrian War was over, but Jorik realized that the real war was just beginning. It would be fought not with ships and weapons, but with fear and reputation. And in that war, humans had already chosen their strategy: make the cost of victory so high that no one would ever want to pay it. Outside his window, the stars shone peacefully, but Jorik knew that peace was fragile.